the great fear here in Ukraine and Kyiv, where I am right now, is that actually Trump may be going over the heads of Ukraine and may be seeking to make a deal with Putin and kind of impose it on Ukraine rather than involving them very directly. I mean, we had Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who said that the Europeans have to own this conflict going forward, but President Trump is going to end it. So I think Trump's input, as he sees it, is to get some sort of deal and then sort of outsource the entire thing to Europe and get out as much as they can. And look, but as you may be aware, that Trump has spoken on the phone with Putin for an undisclosed number of times since he won the election, and that is obviously a source of great disquiet in Kyiv.
Now I'm joined by Catherine Philp, the Times' World Affairs editor. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Hugo.
Thanks very much for being with us. Catherine, we've got a lot to cover, so let's dive straight in, and most of it's pretty bleak. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday, if Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will be terminated. Looking around this morning, how fragile does it all look? It seems pretty bleak, right?
It's very fragile indeed. And, I think we've talked about this before and about how we obviously expected this to get more complex as it got into the later stages of this multi-stage ceasefire. And of course, this is only the first stage. It is looking bleak. Hamas have said that they have indefinitely postponed the release of the next 3 hostages. They have done this, they say, because Israel has not held up its side of the bargain over allowing in certain amounts of aid, and specifically they seem to be arguing over tents being allowed in. Now, officially Israel's saying, oh no, we've sent everything we promised. There have been officials who have told outlets, including the New York Times, that in fact Hamas's claims are correct and Israel hasn't sent everything that was promised. But there are other factors playing into this, including that Netanyahu has delayed sending a negotiation team to Qatar to speak to Hamas officials. And he sent a different cast of negotiators as well, and also said that they're not empowered to actually negotiate on his behalf, just to listen to what's said. So I think there is a perception out there that that Netanyahu is playing for time on this. He's not really, it doesn't appear wholly committed to extending this truce, but he's we, as previously discussed, of course, Netanyahu's got his own reasons for that, including the right-wing members of his government who don't want a truce, who want to resume the war until Hamas is utterly destroyed, which people think is not a plausible aim. But Netanyahu has been aided in this, of course, by Trump saying that all hell will break loose unless all the hostages are released by this weekend, which was never part of the process. So I think that, all of those complications put the whole thing in some jeopardy.
I mean, the sort of the background hum here, of course, as well, is Donald Trump talking about the entirety of the Gazan population being relocated to somewhere in Jordan or Egypt. I mean, this seems like a sort of a mad thing to say, but presumably Hamas isn't best thrilled by that. I mean, so you have to think that, like, what would they be thinking in that context? Because I mean, what's in it for them at this stage to be playing along, to be cooperating when the long-term plan from Israel and America's perspective seems to be that the Gazans are going to be evicted from Gaza anyway?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think that, from the Hamas perspective, as they are one of the parties in this negotiation, Trump's intervention is extremely unhelpful because, if indeed, I mean, I don't know anyone who thinks that anything that Trump has said about Gaza is remotely plausible, despite his constant doubling down on it. He's now saying, that they'll just take over Gaza somehow, that they, after suggesting they would buy it, now they're going to take it over. Egypt and Jordan have pushed back very strongly as well on this idea of relocation. It's not going to happen. And I think it's really important to focus on some of the reasons it wouldn't happen. Well, one, obviously, it would be a war crime. It's ethnic cleansing. You can't forcibly relocate a civilian population in that way. Two, there's been a lot of focus on the fact that Egypt and Jordan don't want to take all these Palestinian refugees, and that would be, hugely destabilizing, especially as they would include Hamas members, because obviously they are amongst the population in Gaza. But I think that, whilst those are genuine fears that they would destabilize those neighbors and destabilize the region, I think it's also very important to remember that there was an Arab League pledge in as long ago as 1959 that no countries would absorb Palestinians as citizens. They would take them as refugees, but not absorb them as citizens, because to do so essentially would wipe out, the Palestinian national cause of a state and of self-determination. And that was something that, with the formation of the PLO, they then asked that was the formal, and the PLO, whatever you think of them, are the internationally recognized representatives of the Palestinian people, and they have a promise from the Arab states that they wouldn't do this because it would wipe out the aspirations of Palestinians. Sure. So there's several factors in that. And the other point I think that is going to be used as leverage on Trump by the likes of Egypt and Jordan is that this is not the way to get Saudi Arabia into some grand regional bargain, which is ultimately what Trump is believed to want and ultimately aim for.
So Trump met Jordan's King Abdullah at the White House last night. How did that go? Was it quite frosty?
No, it seemed that the optics looked pretty warm. I think that everyone who trots into the White House is learning lessons of those who've gone before them. And I thought King Abdullah had played a bit of a blinder he took a page out of the Mexican and Canadian playbook, which is to promise, cash in on the fact that Trump is not a details man and promise him something that you've already announced you were going to do anyway, and so that he thinks he's sort of wrung some concession from you. So King Abdullah made it very clear that Jordan would not be taking the entire population of Gaza, but said that they would take 2,000 Gazan children with cancer for treatment. And Trump liked that very much and said that was very kind and very nice and thought it was a concession. But in fact, Jordan has been doing that since the beginning of the conflict. So again, it is extraordinary to see diplomacy conducted in this way that is essentially to assuage the ego of one man in charge and make him think that he's won something from you that you hadn't given already.
Well, look, you're in Kyiv this morning, so let's turn to the other cheery subject of the war in Ukraine. The Defense Secretary John Healey is meeting with his new US counterpart Pete Hegseth this morning. What are they going to be talking about?
Well, they're going to be meeting against the backdrop of Hegseth's first, and indeed the Trump administration's first meeting with NATO. So I think that chief amongst their discussions is going to be how Europe can take a greater role in NATO and how it can essentially step up to the plate. So I think in terms of Europe's defense, that the US doesn't want to continue to be underwriting to the extent they will. So I think there's going to be a lot about European NATO spending. But there's also going to be this meeting of specifically of the Ukraine Contact Group, which was originally an American-conceived and American-led group to organize a supply of weapons and military aid to Ukraine. And tellingly, that is now being headed by the UK for the first time. So Healey will be in charge of that. And the Hegseth is said to be there, according to the Pentagon, in a listening role rather than, any kind of pledging or leading other countries to pledge anything. So I think that we're starting to see a kind of shift where the US is attempting to take a back seat on the issue of Ukraine.
I mean, so the US taking a back seat is interesting. Does that is that happening concurrently with an effort to basically focus persuasion on Ukraine to persuade Ukraine to make concessions and come to the negotiating table? Does it look like that's the way things are going? That rather than sort of offering undying support to Ukraine, people are now starting to think about sort of dragging them in to make some concessions to the Russians?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think in a sense, they would be, President Zelensky would be happy if that was all they were doing. The great fear here in Ukraine, in Kyiv, where I am right now, is that actually Trump may be going over the heads of Ukraine and may be seeking to make a deal with Putin and kind of impose it on Ukraine rather than involving them very directly. I mean, we had Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who said that the Europeans have to own this conflict going forward, but President Trump is going to end it. So I think Trump's input, as he sees it, is to get some sort of deal and then sort of outsource the entire thing to Europe and get out as much as they can.
And look,
but as you may be aware, that Trump has spoken on the phone with Putin for an undisclosed number of times since he won the election, and that is obviously a source of great disquiet in Kyiv.
Look, finally, Catherine, it's the Munich Security Conference later this week, and Zelensky is going to be meeting J.D. Vance, we believe. What do you think might come out of that? Are they talking about territory swaps? Or, I mean, what is there anything sort of concrete on the table?
Little concrete on the table. Vance is famously said that he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine one way or another. That was before he was even a Veep candidate. He refused in his role as a senator last year to even meet Zelensky. So he's really not a friend. I think that Zelensky will be talking in terms of how good this could be for the US. He's already talked about giving the US exclusive rights over mineral exploitation, rare earth exploitation in Ukraine, things like that. He's quite, Zelensky's quite canny about that. This territory swap idea, I mean, this is in a sense nothing new, because this is really one of the reasons why Ukraine did what it did when it crossed the border into Kursk and took that chunk of Russia off their hands. I mean, the thought was always that they would have to give it back, but they kind of wanted to put it in the pocket for their own security.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he'll raise it, but I'm not sure that's really going to have much traction with the likes of Vance. I think things like, the mineral exploitation and stuff, those kind of carrots that they can hold out to the Washington will be more attractive to Vance.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine Philp. That's Catherine, the Times World Affairs editor there, speaking from Kyiv.